seriously popular.
Welcome to the Life of Bryony, the podcast where we dive into life's messiest, most fascinating and eyebrow-raising topics. Today, I'm joined by sex educator, author, and all-round brilliant human, Ruby Rare. Now, Ruby's just released a book called The Non-Monogamy Playbook, a guide to exploring open relationships with confidence.
And then I see lots of people switch into a kind of sex-positive world. Oh, I should be squirting and having multiple orgasms and going to sex parties and being polyamorous. And it's like, no.
Everything you wanted to know about sex, but were too afraid to ask, right after this. Okay, come on then, let's do it. Let's get into it. Auntie Bryony is here. Presenter Bryony is here for producer Jonathan.
Hello, it's producer Jonathan. I have an issue in my life. People will not be able to tell by my voice, but I am a 40-year-old man.
Right.
Well, I would say older man, an older gent.
I don't think that 40 is that old.
Okay.
But that's because I'm 44.
Wait for the next part. I
Yeah.
have a crush on someone.
Okay. Oh, that's so nice.
Is it? At 40?
Oh my God. One of the ways I knew I was going through an early menopause wasn't just the mental breakdown I had. It was the fact I started to develop massive teenage crushes on like pop stars.
Love that. Like who?
Like I had this massive crush on Sam Fender. And then
Fair.
I had a massive crush on Timothée Chalamet. But now I'm like, no, these are not for me. But I knew that was like, oh, my hormones are obviously off to the races here.
Is this a fantasizing how you might meet?
Yeah, I go into like daydreams, but it's not really about falling in love. Like I think my crushes now, I accept that this is like firm fantasy mode.
Okay, are they shagging you in a lift?
Something like that, yeah.
Love that.
Without getting into it. Anyway, sorry, so who's your crush on?
Yeah, I have a crush on a 31-year-old guy in my gym who is 9 years younger than me.
Well, what's wrong with that?
I think it's too much of an age gap.
I don't think that's much of an age gap.
Do you know what I've done? This is psychotic. Are you ready for this?
Go on.
Started an LGBT group in the gym so I can get his phone number, like a WhatsApp group.
Wow.
Yeah.
And does that work?
Yeah.
And have you messaged him?
Not yet.
Is there any chance that he might listen to The Life of Bryony?
Do you know what? This is the thing. I'm a very straightforward person,
What's
Bryony.
his name?
I'm like a book. I won't go that far because of GDPR issues.
Right, okay.
But I'm going to get to know him a bit more or whatever. But if he asked, I would say like, I have a crush on you, or I will let him know at some point.
I just think it's like you fancy someone.
Yeah, it's just a weird feeling.
Is it?
Yeah, it is. It's a bit strange. It's like, I feel like this is what teenagers should have.
I think definitely if you are like me, a 44-year-old woman who's been married for nearly 15 years and, you know, like crushes are quite unusual. But I think you're a single 40-year-old in your prime.
Thank
I think
you.
you should be constantly in a state of crush.
It's a nice reminder that I'm not dead inside. I'll say that. But anyway, sorry, that led me to ask you, or to want to ask you, do you have any weird celebrity crushes?
So many. All of my crushes ever in my life have been slightly weird, and they tell you a lot about my sort of daddy issues, I think.
Who have you got?
So what my first ever crush when I was like 8 or 9 was on Bruce Willis in Moonlighting. Mm-hmm. Like it was very specifically...
Oh, he's a handsome man.
He's a handsome man, but I was 9 and he was bald. Do you know? And then and this one still, like, just even thinking about it makes me feel a little bit Tom Selleck. Three Men and a Baby.
Mustache God.
I'm hoping listeners will go, oh my God, 3 Men and a Baby. What a movie. What it's way ahead of its time. And it's sort of like, it really shows up toxic masculinity.
I haven't watched that in years.
Because they are left with this baby and they're like, oh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And, you know, they have to like really work through all of their... I mean, looking back, they're not actually that old in the movie. They're like in their sort of like late 20s, early 30s.
When's the last time you watched that?
Quite recently. I watched it in the summer with my daughter and friend and their kids. Yeah. And they were like, we don't watch this. And they loved it. And then now my weird crush.
Yeah. Do you have any that you were kind of embarrassed about? Because I'll share mine after you share yours.
No, you share yours first.
Okay. And like, do you know what? I saw him recently and I still have feelings for him. It is Martin Lewis, the money-saving expert. First of all, I think he is a handsome man, but when he actually starts talking and gets really passionate about where you can save on your car insurance and stuff like that, I'm just like, this is quite hot.
Actually, I would love to get Martin Lewis on this podcast. I did actually interview him about a year ago, and he's so thoughtful and he really cares.
I think it's the passion.
He cares about mental health as well, and he set up the Money and Mental Health Alliance. Anyway, there's a massive link between poverty and mental health and mismanagement of money and mental health.
Absolutely. But there's nothing sexier, though, than a man who sees a problem and tries to fix it.
But I do think we now have to get him on the podcast just so I can see your face. I haven't told you my weird crush, and I don't even know if it is that weird. This guy, he just does something to me, and that's Jeff Goldblum.
Oh, again, I can see it.
So a couple of years ago, I was going to meet someone for a meeting, a very swish London hotel.
Yep.
And
classic Bryony Gordon. This is the lifestyle, guys.
I was going to meet someone from the London Marathon events. There's like a big grand piano in the lobby. And someone was playing piano on the grand piano. And I looked at the person and I was like, that's Jeff Goldblum.
Love that.
Surely it's not Jeff Goldblum. And he saw me clock him and he looked at me and he nodded. And I was
nodded like, it's me.
Yeah, basically.
Love that.
I was like, oh my God, it's Jeff Goldblum, with my friend Jada, who I was going to meet someone with. So I went and I said, can we have a picture with you? And I have a picture of myself basically sitting on Jeff Goldblum's lap on the piano stool.
Do you know what strikes me as very Jeff Goldblum? Did he keep playing the piano as you took the photo?
Yeah.
So Jeff.
Classic and then he just carried on and then off we went. And I was like, that man. Like, my life was basically made.
Can you imagine us going on a joint holiday? You, me, Jeff Goldblum and Martin Lewis, money saving experts. And Martin would have gotten us a great deal. And Jeff, obviously, he was just running the chat.
Just so cool. And like Jeff gets, I think, sexier the older. Like when I look at him in like The Fly, I don't find him that sexy, which is obviously because he turns into a fly. Yeah. But like when you see him as a young actor, I'm like, not really, like, no.
Yeah.
But the older he gets, I'm like, ooh, this man, like, I can't follow him on Instagram because it makes me go a bit funny.
Same with me and Martin Lewis. Same. On today's show, we don't use this phrase anymore and I'm upset about it. We have sexpert Ruby Rare. She'd probably hate me calling her a sexpert.
Yeah.
When did we stop calling people sexperts? 1999?
I think it was probably like the mid-noughties.
Well, I should call her a sex educator and author. How was your chat with Ruby?
It was eye-opening. And it really got me thinking a lot about how different the generations are in terms of their kind of views on sex, but also just on, it made me think, God, I wish I was born 10 years younger so I could be orgying.
On that, actually.
I didn't know that you could like orgy as a verb. Also, what constitutes group sex? Is a threesome group sex?
Absolutely. I think if two people are having sex and a third person is there watching, can't be via Zoom, has to be in person, that's group sex.
And I can't, in my mind, understand a situation whereby someone would be watching me having sex.
Just to remind you as well, at the end of this interview, which I loved listening to again this morning, at the end of this interview, you suggest that our first live podcast should be an orgy, which I think is a genius idea.
Did I? I don't even, do you know what? I don't even remember. I really enjoyed my chat with Ruby. I had like a girls' weekend this weekend. I was trying to explain to them the conversation I'd had with Ruby as women who are the same age as me, similar sort of backgrounds. And we couldn't get our heads around it. Again, like we were okay with ourselves going off and being non-monogamous, but we couldn't get our heads around our partners being non-monogamous.
Yeah.
That was where we drew the line, and we're like, that's just sort of cheating. I just think it's a fascinating conversation, and I think my aversion to it is because of the very heteronormative structures that I've grown up with. That's all it is. Like if it was a normal thing, I'd be like, fine. And I think also, this idea that you live the rest of your life with one person is not necessarily a very helpful one.
Do you know what changed my mind on them as well? Because realistically, if my gym crush turns into a gym relationship and he wants to have an open relationship...
Is this like a thing now? Is this a thing just in the gay community, or is it a thing in
It's very popular.
If I was to get a divorce tomorrow, not saying I'm going to... Would I then have to go out and contend with having relationships with people who are like, we need to be in an open relationship?
What happened to Ruby with another guy?
Yeah, I'm not going to say that's the only thing that puts me off getting a divorce.
Things have gotten too modern in the dating world.
Yeah, I'm like, Harry, I'd say to my husband, darling, we'll just get a takeaway and watch Slow Horses.
Love that. I mean, I'm in. If you're looking for a third.
Yeah, sure thing.
Hey, you sold that car yet?
Yeah, sold it to Carvana.
Oh, I thought you were selling to that guy.
The guy who wanted to pay me in foreign currency, no interest, over 36 months? Yeah, no. Carvana gave me an offer in minutes, picked it up, and paid me on the spot. It was so convenient.
Just like that.
Yeah?
No hassle.
None.
That is super convenient.
Sell your car to Carvana and swap hassle for convenience. Pickup fees may apply.
Wow.
What's up?
I just bought and financed a car through Carvana in minutes.
You? The person who agonized 4 weeks over whether to paint your walls eggshell or off-white bought and financed a car in minutes?
They made it easy. Transparent terms, customizable down and monthly. Didn't even have to do any paperwork.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Hey, have you checked out that spreadsheet I sent you for our dinner options?
Finance your car with Carvana and experience total control. Financing subject to credit approval.
If you're enjoying today's show, why not make this a regular thing? Hit follow and let's keep this relationship going, monogamous or otherwise. Ruby Rare, I'm quite excited about this because I think this is the first Life of Bryony podcast where we have spoken about sex.
Really?
Yeah.
That surprises me.
This is like my first X-rated podcast.
I'm here to hold your hand through it.
So Ruby has written the Non-Monogamy Playbook.
It's a mouthful, but yes. I just got the books today, which is why I'm like, it's here. I wrote a book and it's actually a real book.
My copy I left out this morning on the kitchen table and my husband was like, is there anything you want to tell me, Bryony? And I was like, well, what are your thoughts? I'm like a 44-year-old woman, middle class, middle England, you know, like I'm reasonably woke, I think, but I'm not of the age, you know, I'm a zennial. So like at the very end of millennials, I was born in 1980 and my husband was also born in 1980. And I mean, listen, let's face it, non-monogamy is a thing for every generation. Like I'm not going to pretend that you know, but I really look at your generation, younger generations, and there is a big part of me that is really happy that people can explore their sexuality in really open and honest ways. Because when I was young, the only way I could explore my sexuality was when I was high and drunk, basically.
Yeah. And to be honest, there's still a lot of that in my generation and the generations below.
How old are you?
I'm 31.
Okay.
So I'm kind of the other side of the millennial.
Yeah.
So your husband was surprised, but what was the reaction when you were like, what do you think about this?
He said, what do you mean, like having an affair? And then he just looked really embarrassed. And he said, I'm just not going to talk about this with you. And then he went to the loo. And that was that.
Yeah.
It got me thinking about the way that my generation views sex, specifically women as well, because I think that there's a lot of shame around sex. I really wanted to kind of unpack that a bit and talk about how it's different. Like I'm really interested in having conversations across the generations.
Me too.
You know?
Yeah.
That kind of explain it, because I know there'll be a lot of people that listen to the Life of Bryony who are like me, that are like middle-aged mums, basically. I think that a lot of women have so much internal shame about sex, about enjoying it, about their fantasies, about whatever. And that when you have that sort of like internal shame, it sort of colours your whole view of yourself, I think. Just generally like outside of the bedroom.
Do you remember when you realised that you were allowed to have fun when you had sex?
I mean, it was really late on.
Yeah.
I definitely, for me, I got my pleasure when having sex by seeing the pleasure I had given the man.
Yeah. It's like performing a role that we've been taught is the way that we perform
Yeah.
during sex, and that we get a kind of good feedback loop. And so then that says something about our self-worth and our place in kind of society and all that stuff.
Yeah. And I don't say that with any kind of like pride or anything like that. It's just how it was, you know.
Yeah.
I suppose I started, you know, having very regular sex in the noughties. And, you know, like that, the culture was just like, you know, women were, you know, shamed for being a tiny bit overweight. You know, female celebrities, if they were drunk and fell out of a club, it was like they were a complete mess. And there was this whole kind of narrative. So, I mean, I'm speaking for myself, and there may be people that listen and are like, well, no. But like also things like wanking, masturbation, like huge shame about. I mean, and I do it all the time, especially since I started on testosterone.
Yeah, a lot of my perimenopausal mates are like, why am I like suddenly horny in this kind of different way? It's like, I don't know.
Totally.
Hormones are wild, and there's still so much unknown and unresearched. Even though we come from like different ends of the millennial generation, same for me. I was a teenager in the noughties. Wanking was this shameful, forbidden thing. I wasn't raised in a religious environment, but I still picked up a lot of that kind of undertone of British religious fear and shame.
Yeah.
It's nuts. When you really go back and unpack the ways that you were introduced to sex and relationships. And I think a lot about kind of sexual scripts and romantic scripts, which are all the messages that we've been handed down, whether that's generationally through our family and society, whether that's like media outlets kind of, and the messages we pick up, the art that we consume, the messages we hear from our peers. It all ends up feeling really quite prescriptive and narrow. And there's that kind of undertone of just wanting to be normal.
Heteronormative.
Yeah, well, lots of the normatives, but like, why are we striving to fit in with this kind of idealized norm rather than thinking, like, I want us to set our standards higher. I want us to think about what incredible sex can look like in our lives, not just functional. What does a really happy, fulfilling relationship look like, rather than just like, I'm fine. Yeah. And also there are moments for just fine as well. That's not, I don't want to like massively overly positivity wash and be like, we have to all live in this utopia all the time. It's realistic. It's embracing the mess of all of this, but it's kind of trying to, so much of my career has been influenced by me becoming more and more curious about this stuff.
Okay.
And kind of real time experiencing it and then talking about it professionally.
So tell me how you got into this.
I started working in schools. I worked for an amazing charity called Brooke, and I'm still an ambassador for them, and they are amazing. And then started kind of accidentally talking about my job online, and people were more and more fascinated by it. And so that just snowballed and started working with groups of adults doing like workshops and public speaking, realizing that honestly, grown-ups had the same questions that a lot of 13, 14, 15-year-olds I was working with had. And I think we're all really deeply impacted by the lack of education that we didn't get when we were teenagers still, like both of us, like, and people who are older and younger than us. Yeah, then I was thinking about what I wanted to write for my second book, and I've been in open relationships for a decade now.
Right.
And in different ways, and it's something that whenever I do a workshop about non-monogamy or threesomes, they're always the best attended.
Really?
People are so curious, especially like non-monogamy. It's people in like 20s upwards, but there are people in their like 40s, 50s who are DMing me, asking questions, really curious. I think there's this growing curiosity.
So you wrote the playbook on it?
I'm trying, yeah. Well, and also there aren't that many UK books. It's all American. It's either quite earnest therapy speak, so theory-based it kind of sucks the fun out of what you're potentially trying to do, or it's like wild, sensationalized, hypersexualized. Right. And I kind of wanted to find something that was in the middle.
In the middle, okay. Talk to me about the history of monogamy, because I think this is fascinating, and the sort of, you know, the feminist implications of monogamy and all of that, the kind of history of it.
Yeah, so monogamy has a really rich and interesting history, and our perception of monogamy now is so different to how monogamy was viewed even 200 years ago, but more and more and more. Around the kind of 1700s, you get like this moment where romantic love starts to merge with marriage.
Right.
And before then, there were some people who were like lucky enough to like /fancy/love the person that they were with, but most of the time
it wasn't a given.
No, and it was a business venture. This was about like solidifying your assets.
That's why we have things like dowries.
Yeah, and it was a lot of the men being like, cool, you'll have my kids, this is my legacy, this is where all my stuff goes to. We've also got to be real about the fact that the woman and the wife, mother in that was viewed as a property as well. And that has been pretty consistent in the way that marriages have been navigated and negotiated. And as much as, I don't know, I always feel nervous saying a bit of this because this can be a touchy subject and people can feel, very personal about it. And this is not me in any way like criticising people's individual choices to marry or be monogamous, but we have such a focus on love these days as the defining factor of marriage. But really, still, that idea of kind of a tax break, solidify, putting your assets together.
It's still a business venture.
It's still quite businessy and it serves a purpose. I do get that, but I wish more people were aware of the history around that and kind of where it's all come from.
Well, there's so much pain around it, isn't there? Because, the idea that, non-monogamy, as I said, is not new. Like, people have been, I suppose, non-consensually in non-monogamous relationships, sometimes without knowing they are.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? This is what we call about cheating. But it does seem to me that there's a lot of sort of moral panic about this kind of thing. And it's interesting because we have to accept that it happens and that humans are humans.
The second chapter of the book is all about cheating because that's a very common misconception of going, oh, well, if you're in an open relationship, you're just a cheater and you're legitimizing it. And
that's not me wanting to say
I know it's not, but I know that that's something that does come up a lot of the time, which is why I wanted to address it head on. And cheating's not great. Like, doing anything that's deceitful and where you're kind of breaking trust in any relationship is not something I condone. I feel like most people are on board with that. But also, it feels like if you are a person who has kind of curiosity and desires to have romantic or sexual connections or both with other people, it feels monogamy as just like an assumed way of doing relationships can feel really limiting. And for some people, that suits them really well. For others, if that's just the one relationship style you've been given, it might feel really clunky and like it just really doesn't work for you. I was lucky. I was dating in my early 20s and matched with someone on a dating app who had polyamory in his profile. And so I Googled it and was like, I've never heard that word before. Okay, I'm casually dating. I guess I'll just give this a go. And I got to have this really magical, like, fly on the wall moment of dating him, really getting to know his girlfriend really well, like them moving in and me being able to ask, like, all of the questions that you're not allowed to ask people of like, how does this work? How is this feeling?
How did that work and how did that feel? Because I'm really there's a big chapter about jealousy because that does, I go, oh.
Well, and so did I back then. And I guess with most things, the idea of something has more fear in it than the thing itself. A lot of it was actually quite anticlimactic of going like, oh, wow, okay, there's a thing that's about to happen and maybe it's going to be really nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
And sometimes the feelings come up and it's really sticky and really difficult. But also sometimes it would happen and I'd go, oh, okay, yeah, that really wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Okay.
I remember it's so funny talking about this relationship that's like so old in my brain now. But I went and hung out with this guy I was seeing and we were like, watched some telly, slept together. That was all nice. And we were like sat up in bed chatting and his girlfriend came home because she was working late nights at the time. And she like knocked on the door, peeped her head round and we'd not seen each other in ages. And so she like sat on the bed and like gave me a hug. I think I was wearing a t-shirt. I don't know if I was naked. But yeah, like gave me a hug and like we had a genuine like, oh my God, hi, how are you? What's going on? And then we were all chatting for a bit and it got late and was time to go to bed and they had a spare room. And then we did this very funny, like, British thing of me being like, oh, I'll sleep in the spare room. It's fine. She was like, no, it's okay. Like, you stay here. I'll go. Blah, 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 blah. And then, like, this guy going, well, what?
Did he go in the spare room?
No, in the end, like, me and him slept and she went in the spare room. And then in the morning, he went to work and the two of us, like, hung out for a bit and had a cup of tea and a catch up and then gave each other a hug and I went to work. You know, like, it was... I'm sure that for some people listening, that feels really wild. And I guess at the time it felt a little bit like, ooh, I'm doing something different. But it's just become my version of normal. Okay. I've done this for a long time in different, the way I do open relationships has continued to change and evolve over a decade. But I promise you it's not as like crazy and wild as you think.
Also, that's the thing, we have a very limited view, don't we, of what non-monogamy is. Tell me why you choose to live that lifestyle. lifestyle.
My
Oh
lifestyle.
God, I sound like such a boomer. Tell me why you live the way you live.
I live my
like-
lifestyle. Yeah, I've bounced around and tried lots of different things. I did kind of capital P polyamory for a while, and that was really beautiful. It was also quite messy, but I think whenever you're trying something out, you've got to allow for a bit of mess. And people trying this early on and going through mistakes and like write off different, like non-monogamy as a whole because they've seen one person have a difficult time with it. Whereas like if you were in a monogamous relationship and it ended, I wouldn't go, see, monogamy doesn't work, does it?
Well, this is the thing.
It doesn't really make sense
But
to me.
relationships are inherently messy.
Yeah, and they end and change
Humans
and
are.
transform. Like
Yeah.
we're all kind of hot messes. So yeah, did that, and then was in a kind of long-term relationship with other partners for a while, and kind of developed this way of thinking about a lot of my romantic and sexual interactions being like sexy friends. So like a friendship where elements of like romance and sex can be woven into that. But if we stop sleeping together, it doesn't mean we're breaking up because the friendship is the foundational part of that. And now while I was writing this book, I've kind of been doing solo polyamory for a year or so now, which is this idea of I have several really deep, connected, meaningful relationships in my life, some of which have been like years and years long. But none of those relationships I'm seeing as like me being one half of a whole.
Your primary.
I don't know, I find it really cheesy phrasing it like this, but I'm sort of, for now, I'm like my own primary partner.
No,
And then I have all
love
of these
this.
other beautiful people in my life, but I'm not looking to anyone going, let's merge finances. I'm not really interested in marriage at the minute. I don't want to cohabit with anyone right now. I can so see how for someone else that feels like I'm committing less. Today, actually, I've been like recording these vox pops that I'm doing around the book launch. And so we've been asking people like, would you open up your relationship? And one of the things, whenever someone said no, there was this real correlation between monogamy and exclusivity and commitment. And for me, 10 years into this, I don't see exclusivity as the only way that you can show and act commitment.
Yeah.
Which I think can be quite hard to get your head around.
It is, but
for
I mean,
some
again,
people.
it goes back to the sort of heteronormative, the ideas of, and how we validate ourselves as humans.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the truth, you know. So like when we go back to that first conversation about how initially the pleasure I derived from sex was the pleasure I gave to men.
Yeah.
That's a very heteronormative sort of narrative that it's programmed into us,
Yeah.
right? But that idea, so I instinctively have to say, if I think about the idea of me and my husband opening our relationship up, this is what I truthfully feel
Yeah.
like. I would be fine with me sleeping with someone else, but
You'd be so many people say that.
I would be wildly
Yeah.
uncomfortable with him sleeping with someone else. And that's, I'm like, I know logically that is just hypocritical, stupid.
We are allowed to be hypocritical, though,
Yeah.
with this. I think it's really important to acknowledge that. I find it easier for me to be the one going out and having the fun than suddenly a partner going off and doing that. It's way harder to navigate.
What is Dax, are you?
Tracking all our cars on Carvana Value Tracker on all our devices? Yes, Kristen, yes, I am.
Well, I've been looking for my phone for
In Dax's domain, we see all. So we always know what our cars are worth.
all of them.
All of them. Value surge, trucks up 3.9%.
That's a great offer.
I know. Sell?
Sell.
Track your car's value with Carvana Value Tracker today.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
Now, let's talk about elastic love. Because you're taught that there's a pot of love and there's a certain amount to go around. And once that's used up, no one else is, getting any. And, very much that culture where we live of like, well, what if they prefer that person to me? Or I'm, we live in a very sort of, it's almost transactional, to be honest.
And we see a kind of innate competition with dating and with partners. Even if we think about like the dating like marketplace, the way that economics feeds into our language around dating, I think we have this real idea that we have to hold on to the kind of affection or the people that we've acquired, and the way that we value success in relationships is how long you hold on to something.
Yeah.
And like a long-term relationship is a beautiful thing. Like I was speaking to someone today who's been married for 56 years. Like I love that. And she seems really happy.
Yeah.
But if she was married for 56 years and miserable, I don't think you get a prize for that. And maybe that's a kind of shift in generational attitude, that I want people to feel fulfilled and joyful in their lives and in their relationships. Realistically, you're not going to feel like that all the time. There's a lot of mundane stuff that we have to do in our lives. But if you're miserable in a relationship, you owe it to yourself to not be in that anymore. That's not me then going, and then open up and explore this wild world. But like, I think there's kind of social embarrassment and shame about ending relationships, and we view that as a failure. And I really want people to see that as a positive, even though there's pain and mess there.
I think you're right. I know certainly I have a lot of friends who have got divorced and they've viewed it as a failure, when actually sometimes you sit there and go, actually, no, this is a really fantastically grown up decision that
you're
you've
making
made.
some decisions for yourself.
Yeah.
And then often I've got like a group of mates who are a decade older than me, like the ones who've got divorced, they're having an absolute ball right now. Like, it's kind of the fear of breaking the societal rules, and we still have this stigma about this, particularly divorce, but then a sense of freedom and agency and exploration, however you want that to look. I kind of want people to have access to that more.
So talk to me about jealousy and how to you advocate leaning into it and exploring what it says about you in a way.
I advocate leaning in because I can recognise in so many people I've worked with, and in myself as well, that we are taught to see a bit of jealousy in ourselves and panic and like really try to distance, like
Be ashamed of it.
Be ashamed of it, not look at the kind of real vulnerabilities and what's going on behind it, jumping to anger, fear, sadness. Like I speak about it a bit more in depth in the book, but there's a brilliant writer called Kathy Labriola, and she wrote a book all about jealousy. It's this kind of workbook. And those three emotions are kind of the pillar stones of how we respond to jealousy. It's always interesting thinking about which are the ones you gravitate to the most. Like a lot of people, it can be anger. For me, it's like sadness and fear, and the fear of kind of the downward spiral of going, oh, if that person fancies that person, then obviously they're going to abandon me because I'm worthless, and they're going to fall in love and skip off into the sunset and they'll never think of me again. And it's like, no, someone's just told me that they think that person's fit. If you lean in and look at the situation you're in and the feelings that are being brought up for you, you're able to have a bit more of a pragmatic understanding of where you're at. And I quite like jealousy because it really encourages me to feel vulnerable and to communicate vulnerably with the people I'm with. So being able to say like, this is making me feel weird. Can you sit with me and can we chat about it? Because some of this might be your actions and we can kind of tweak and refine the way that we're doing it. Some of it is shit from my past that's being brought up, and the more you know about this, the better we're able to do this in the future. It's kind of a springboard for really excellent communication.
So if someone's listening and they think, actually, I would like to explore, maybe it's not non-monogamy, maybe it's just their sexuality. You spoke about it earlier. Often in perimenopause, the hormones, whatever's going on, I don't know. Like, I am horny as hell, okay? Horny as hell, Ruby.
I'm really happy for you.
And so when I was writing this, my book, every day in the middle of the day, I just have to go. And
you have to have a wank break. This book is like built on masturbation,
breaks.
Honestly. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Sorry, we got sidetracked. So if someone's perimenopausal.
Okay, so say I wanted to explore my sexuality. What tips would you give me?
You're just asking for a friend, right?
Just asking for a friend.
Well, in terms of feeling comfortable exploring and doing all of this, I'd encourage you to find the people in your life who you can chat a bit more intimately about this. Like, find some of your friends where you can kind of go there and have chats and be like, oh God, we've never really spoken about this, but I guess it's important that we are. Because it's much harder when you feel like you're doing this completely on your own. And I speak to lots of people who have these kind of fascinations and maybe follow people online, and so get a taste of these different things, but they don't really have people that they can chat to in their own lives. So try and find those people, or look up sort of sex positive events, whether that's online or offline, and make those connections where you can talk about this. And then like there's some kind of 101 like self-discovery therapy stuff. Like I'd want someone like you who is looking to do this to look at the history of their sex life so far and what the really high moments are. Like when you've had incredible sex before, what has that looked like and felt like, and why has it had such a lasting impact on you, and what about that do you want to continue exploring? Like there's so much out there, it can feel a bit overwhelming, and the encouragement isn't like go out there and do everything you possibly can, because for lots of people that's not going to be appealing. But I want you to think about what excites you and what makes you feel curious, and kind of be led by that rather than all the shoulds.
Yeah.
Because we get governed by shoulds in a really negative way. And then I see lots of people switch into a kind of sex positive world and pick up a load of shoulds again, of being like, oh, I should be squirting and having multiple orgasms and going to sex parties and being polyamorous. And it's like, no. If some of that stuff appeals to you, great.
Is that like just that is squirting actually a thing? Like when
I said it, I saw your eyes go and I was like, oh, we're going to talk about that, aren't we?
I genuinely am happy to put it on the record that I have never squirted.
That's okay. For a lot of people, that is the case.
I mean, like there will be people listening to this who probably have never had an orgasm.
Yeah.
That's the sad truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for some people, like pleasure isn't about an orgasm. Again, like when we are fed this should that good sex is like, oh, well, you need to have an orgasm in order for it to be like successful. How horrible is that message if you're someone who really struggles to orgasm? Maybe you never have. Then you just automatically feel like a failure. Like what does pleasure look and feel like if it's separated from orgasm, if orgasm's not on the table?
I'm always amazed when women talk about coming through penetrative sex.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, it's sort of...
For lots of people, their anatomy just isn't made for that.
Exactly.
Like in the same way for me, I'm like, excuse me?
Yeah.
But it's about like 75% of women and people with like vulvas who, just because of the positioning of the vaginal opening and the clitoris, like anatomically, it's really hard to stimulate the clitoris while having just penetrative sex. So for about 75% of women and people with vulvas, they need some form of clitoral stimulation in order to have an orgasm.
Well, I feel much better about myself now, Ruby.
We're in the majority. And like, if you're in that 25%, hey, that's cool. But all of our bodies do different things.
Those people are like sex bombs.
No, I can't do that, and I'm still a sex bomb. Come on.
That's true.
And so are you.
I'm just imagining this being clipped and put on my social media and my mum going, what the fuck?
But I'm sure, like, I'd love to have a conversation with your mum about this stuff.
No.
You don't have to be there as well, but like, you know, it's fascinating. Everyone has a relationship to this subject matter. Whether if you're like an asexual and aromantic person, you have no interest in any of this, you've still grown up in a hypersexualized, hyper-romanticized world, you still have a kind like something interesting to say.
Yeah.
That's why I'm just a nerd about this. I think this is all like the kind of absolute core of us as humans.
What was the biggest misconception you had about non-monogamy when you started?
That it was going to be all about sex and I'd be going to an orgy every weekend.
You're not?
I'm not.
Have you been to an orgy?
I have orgied in the past. I will continue to orgy.
Well, okay.
But it's a rarer occurrence. I know this is really boring. There's a lot more kind of like mundane chats and communication.
I love the way you said, I know this is really boring talking about orgying. No one on this podcast has yet orgied.
Yeah.
I mean, they may have orgied, but we haven't spoken about their orgying.
I'm having what I would classify as a moderate amount of group sex.
Okay. What's a moderate amount of group sex? How many of you were in the room at the time?
It varies, like, 3+.
Okay.
Probably once a month.
Of all genders?
All genders, yeah.
Okay.
But like that kind of Romanesque orgy, that's only happened to me a couple of times. And I thought that would be like polyamory. Wow, here's your key to
orgy town. What's the one piece of advice you'd give to someone who's thinking about orgying for the first time?
Manage your expectations.
Okay.
I mean, sexual health. Bring your lube, bring your condoms.
Yeah. Bring your boundaries.
Bring your boundaries. Don't get too drunk. Be present in that moment. And
what happens? Is there a lot of drinking at orgies?
They vary. There's a slightly more kind of Berlin vibe parties that are a bit more hardcore. A lot of places I've gone to, there's not a big drinking culture. A lot of the time people drink when they're kind of nervous.
Right.
Whenever I go into a straight mainstream club, which is about once a year now, I'm like, whoa, there is a kind of drinking problem in the UK. And actually a lot of the time in the queer spaces I'm in, people aren't as on it.
Okay, yeah. Just for those of us, we're a big sober community, the Life of Bryony. And I don't want to rule us out of orgies because we've given up drinking.
There are specific parties that are just like for sober people.
Maybe we could create our own Life of Bryony Ruby Rare
Sober orgy.
Hey. All our details are in the show notes. Massive thank you to Ruby for being so lovely and frank with me today and getting me to talk about squirting for the first time in my entire life. Her book, The Non-Monogamy Playbook, is as much about self-discovery as it is about sex, frankly. Whether you're monogamous, polyamorous, or just someone who wants to rethink the shoulds of modern love and life, it's a fascinating read. Now, if this conversation sparks something for you, share it with a friend, maybe an intimate friend. Go on, start that slightly awkward but important chat about sex and relationships. And please hit follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. Take care, be kind to yourself, and I'll see you on Friday.